Well, I'm very thrilled and delighted to have for our keynote interview for today the president of Alibaba Group, Michael Evans. Mike, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Pleasure, David. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, Mike, you're in China at the Alibaba head offices. Perhaps you can give us a little flavor of what the atmosphere is like at the moment.
Well, the atmosphere is great, but I have to tell you that this is my first time back in Hangzhou in 21 months. And it's, of course, great to be back. And it's great to be back at a time when we're doing 11/11. This is my 7th year attending. This is the 13th year of 11/11. It's always different. And so it's never the same. It never gets boring. It's always so interesting and challenging to see what we're going to do next. And so the atmosphere this year is no different than most years. We're coming into the home stretch. People are excited, and we're hoping for a very good outcome.
Now, Mike, as you say, you've now been back in China after an absence that I think all of us are feeling we'd love to get back in China. Everything changes so fast. We get from what you observe outside of the country, when you're in there, it's different, of course. But perhaps you can give us your feel of China retail at the moment.
Well, you sort of touched on it, David, because China retail, if you look at the big picture, the change continues to be super rapid. And 11/11 gives us just a glimpse of what's going on because it's a big event and it's taking place, over a specific period of time. But it's only a glimpse, and you have to look at the broader changes that are taking place in terms of consumption and also the digitization of the economy. And that's the most important observation. We're doing very interesting things with consumers in terms of making it more interactive, making it more immersive. We're providing different and better digital tools for the merchants as well. And the combined experience is what leads to greater overall engagement, greater learning for us, a wonderful experience for merchants and consumers, and we hope a great result.
Now, you talked a little bit about the speed. We sort of like to refer to China as a sort of China speed. Maybe 5 years ago, I was saying it was like 10 times everywhere else. Now it's probably about 30 times everywhere else. Do you think that speed is as fast as ever was, or indeed do you think it's even accelerating now?
Well, I think that it has accelerated a bit. And the reason for that is that as we've dealt with the challenges of the pandemic and as we emerge from the pandemic, we ourselves have had to make a number of significant changes in our business. We've had to adapt very quickly just to change ourselves. And the whole reason that we need to change quickly is because our merchants and our consumers are relying on us. So the way that we used to do things has changed exponentially because the environment that we're working in and trying to provide these services to merchants and consumers has changed so radically. I think in the normal course, without the pandemic and COVID, we would have seen rapid change. But the last 18 months, it's hard to look back and say that we would have ever predicted that we'd be where we are today. And who knows where we'll be in 12 or 24 months.
And have you had to adapt some of the processes, procedures, the way in which you innovate to adapt to that changing requirements from your customers in a way that is very reflective of the changes that we've all had to go through over the course of the last 18 months?
Well, I'll give you an example. It's a very interesting question, David, because innovation, most people sort of associate in these technology businesses, well, we build a better mousetrap, or we have a faster service, or we have a better cloud capability, or our payments can process faster, or our digital logistics capabilities are somehow improved. But what we realized at the most basic level, a lot of the innovation that we needed to do was to help small businesses in China. So for example, if you didn't have the digital tools as a small business going into COVID, you were shut down. Away from digital tools, even more basic than digital tools, if you didn't have the people to show up and work for you because they were at home in the pandemic, how do you get those services? How do you get those people? How do you run your business? And so what we did, we spent a lot of time helping our merchants with very basic things so that they could survive in the pandemic. And then it occurred to us that we need to equip them with the digital tools and capabilities to be able to continue to adapt no matter what the environment is. So I think there's a very different type of innovation during COVID. And that's what I mean about us adapting. We had always thought, oh, it's all about, specific things that we're changing every year. Now we need to change a bunch of different things to help our customers.
Now, you said that you've been involved in many 1111s. Each of them have their own sort of unique characteristics to them. How would you characterize this year's 1111?
Well, 1111 is just an evolving dynamic. So you characterized it right. So each year, it's not that we try and do new things, it's that we want to innovate and try new ideas. Because this is the largest collection or the largest gathering of merchants and consumers for any shopping event. So this year we decided to focus on two things. One was sustainability, and you've heard some of this from others of my colleagues from Alibaba. But sustainability is really, really important because it's part of our ESG program. And why not try all this at scale during our 1111 Global Shopping Festival? So things like our green voucher, which encourages people to buy products that are more green. And I'm not talking about vegetables, I'm talking about clean energy and super good for the environment. That's proving to be very popular. We have a secondhand platform called Idle Fish. And so what we're saying to people is, if you turn in your used gadgets, your old electronics, we'll exchange those for a very attractive new products that are also green or more green than the ones that you're getting rid of. And finally, if you look at logistics, which is a huge creator of packaging waste and tape, we're starting to use our algorithms to right-size packages for the product that goes in them so you don't have 80% of the box empty, and also to reduce the amount of tape, and then have this year 60,000 pickup locations for all of the packaging that needs to be recycled. So these are just a few of the many, many sort of sustainable things that we want to do. The other part is inclusivity. So this is the second big theme. A lot of people say, well, what does that mean? And it means many things. First of all, we are reaching into the lower tier cities to include as many people in the China population as possible to give them the opportunity. And what that means is you have to have the assortment because they're not going to buy a luxury product. They might, but the probability is they need something that's a little less expensive. So you need a more varied assortment. We also started a program in 2006. It's called the Goods for Good program. And it's very interesting. Just think of it as a process where you have products, goods, that are for good. And we've ramped that program up because we want people to think about good products and sustainable products. And of course, we have a variety of incentives for merchants and for Alibaba to contribute to charities as a result of the success of the program. So we have a lot of interesting inclusive initiatives.
Now, Mike, we had a couple of sessions over the course of our broadcasting from the 1st of November to today, our final day, on those lower tier cities in China. And it is extraordinary what opportunities there are for all sorts of brands in those cities.
Well, I think that this is a good example of where when you penetrate not a different country, but a different part of the country and a different segment of consumers, you can't have one strategy that's going to work for everyone. And so I think what the teams have done very well internally is they've said, listen, what product assortment are we going to need to satisfy the needs of these consumers? What do they really want? And so if you haven't been in that part of China actively building your business, it's very hard to figure that out. And I think that what we've done is we push down into the rural areas and into that part of China to really understand what they need. And then we've developed the capability in our sourcing and product assortment to serve their interest. Because it isn't about making the sale on 11/11. It's about establishing an engagement with that consumer and then continuing to have them come back to our platform because we have what they need, not just today, but also in the future.
I think you make a very important point, and I think it was one of the points that one of our WPP agencies, AKQA, made in one of our live sessions for China, which we went to, as you know, every morning, that 11/11 needs to be seen as an opportunity to engage consumers, to start a dialogue with them if they are new consumers, that you then use and activate over the course of the next 12 months. So it becomes a very important, not just tactical opportunity, but a very important strategic opportunity for brands to start a longer conversation with consumers.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Now, Mike, you're in a very interesting position at the moment over the course of the 11 days to take a view, a helicopter view of what has been interesting from a consumer trends point of view. So what helicopter observations can you make, do you think?
Well, I think that, I'd look at consumer behaviors, I think are the most interesting. Chris Tung talked about live streaming. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but that is probably the most popular way for brands to engage directly with consumers. And another one of my colleagues, Christina from Italy, she talked about what we were doing in terms of the first ever digital art gallery. So this is a new way for people to have an interesting experience. Not all 900 million people on our platform are interested in art, but there are a lot that are, actually quite a few more than we actually thought. So we're learning a lot from that. So I think that together with a lot of other digital capabilities that allow the consumer to engage and have an immersive experience on the platform, not just as part of 11/11, but 365 days a year, I think that's a big part of what's going on. But I think the second piece of it, David, is also about category expansion. And there have been historically long-held views that there are certain categories and certain products that could never be sold on a platform online. Big things like luxury cars, luxury boats, houses, big furniture. And the theory was that either they were far too expensive and therefore people had to go and see them in an offline location, or that they were just things that people wanted to try on and that, nobody would ever buy anything. I remember having these conversations with brands. They'd never buy anything that they couldn't try on first. It's all changed. So if you look at what's happening on the platform today, all those products are available and all of them are selling successfully. So brands are reimagining the possibility, not of doing everything online, but of having their products in a pandemic, not in a pandemic, available to be seen and purchased by consumers online or offline.
Now, Mike, presumably that's, in a sense, that change is a combination of two things. One of them is the consumers are becoming more comfortable shopping across category. Maybe the pandemic has made certain of those categories, it's the only way they could access them. But also that the platform is envisioning the way in which those products are displayed, the way in which you can interact with them in a more holistic perspective. Is that something that we will see more of in the future?
I think it will. It's cutting across a couple of different thoughts and perspectives. The first of which is, new retail is something that we've been focusing on for years, really the last 3.5 years. And when we first started, we thought it would only be good in a small number of categories because we couldn't imagine how people would buy groceries without, checking out the fruit and the vegetables and things like that. What we realized, of course, is particularly during the pandemic, people were prepared to buy a lot of things online that they didn't want to buy, that they had traditionally bought offline. And so the being able to offer a consumer the capability to do online or offline at any time, whenever he or she wants to, turned out to be a very, very attractive consumer value proposition. The second thing we realized was that we had always thought, well, older people, for example, they're not going to have a strong interest in using online because it means it's more complicated. You have to download apps, you have to go through all sorts of processes. And we were wrong. The pandemic showed us that elderly people were just as capable and just as interested in using an online capability as an offline capability, and they were pretty sophisticated in terms of being able to navigate a smartphone mobile device. Maybe not as capable as a 20-year-old, but certainly capable of using it to satisfy their needs. And so we see this trend will continue, and we want to make it ubiquitous. So it doesn't matter whether it's online or offline. It doesn't matter what category. We want the flexibility and the capability for the consumer to do whatever they need to do whenever they want to do it.
Now, Mike, as we recover around the world, clearly from the pandemic, different speeds in different markets, what do you see the opportunities for international brands being? And what's the sort of enduring sort of appeal of international brands for e-commerce in China?
Well, this is a very interesting question, right? Because you hear from everybody that China is this huge opportunity for international brands. But what is the appeal? So I'm really starting with the second piece of your question. Why do Chinese consumers love international brands? And we think it's really 3-4 things. First of all, high quality products, no matter what the category is. High quality products. Number 2, safe. Number 3, reasonably priced. Obviously, luxury products are expensive, but for the most part, the products are reasonably priced. And number 4, a history of product innovation that keeps filling the pipeline with interesting things that are really cool and fit exactly with the 900 million people who are changing their lifestyle in China. So if you understand the appeal, then if you're an international brand, the question is, how do I tap into that appeal? What are my products? How could I customize them for the Chinese market? And how do I go there and make sure that I can find the consumers that might be interested? And so what I see, and this is really now with the benefit of almost 7 years of experience here, is that international brands by the tens of thousands. It doesn't matter whether in the United States, Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. It doesn't matter whether they're in fashion, apparel, FMCG. It doesn't matter, beauty. They're all finding a way to tap into this market.
So that's in the context of that, Mike, what's the role of the Alibaba platforms play in making that happen?
Well, look, people have to come to us or we go to them and they say, how do we do this? This is not obvious. And it's not always easy. And it doesn't happen in 15 or 20 days. It requires a fair bit of work. And you have to be prepared to invest for the long term. This is much easier for large brands than it is for small businesses. But we get into a dialogue with brands one by one. And this is a big part of our globalization effort, is to position our business development people all over the world to educate brands and explain how it works. We do, as part of that, during 11/11, we do exactly what we're doing now, which is we try and find opportunities to bring brands together and to talk to them, not just about the opportunity, but how do you do it? What is a TP? How much will it cost? How long will it take? Will I be able to have a large sustainable business? How do we use customer data? How much product customization is required? There are 1,000 questions and there are answers to all of them, but this is the education process and it's not simple.
Now, Mike, when we sort of think about 11/11 and we think about the digitization of retail, new retail as you describe it, we tend to think about it in terms of how it can impact big brands, and clearly brands that have got a reasonable amount of resource behind them. But what about the small business? Are they being left behind?
It's a good question, David. They're not being left behind, but your premise is correct, which is if I'm a big brand, it's a lot easier for me to come to the China market. I have the resources. I have the lawyers who can do my IP. I have the marketing teams who can figure out my story. I have so many more resources, and I have a longer time frame over which I can build a business. But if I'm a small business, I don't have the resources. I don't have the capabilities. I have no one on the ground. I don't know how to understand how to register my IP. So we recognize this, and we have taken steps to think about how do we need to support small brands on our platform as opposed to the way that we support the big brands. And I think it falls into two areas. The first is we have to make it less expensive for them. So we've got to provide them digital tools, in many cases for free. We have to provide support services for them so that they can actually build their business. So in the absence of having anyone on the ground, we have to figure out what support can we provide. And I think the second area is that we have to think about how will they grow their business. So this gets into the whole issue of how do we create their story, present their story, target their product and their sort of marketing strategy to the right people on our platform so that they have a chance to generate traffic, find buyers, and start to grow their brand. This is much more difficult for small businesses, but we have had a lot of success, and much of this was driven by our experience in the pandemic, where we had to reach out, as I said earlier, to these small businesses to help them. And we now see some of the best performers on our platform in 1111, David, are actually the small brands that we've been incubating on Tmall. So this is very exciting because this means that in the future, consumers get to see a whole new series of brands that are coming down the pike and going to be available for them.
Now, Mike, one of the things that clearly the big brands have always had access to is an amazing amount of data, and clearly the resources to mine that data to create insights. Presumably, the smaller brands now, via your platforms, now have access to data that they never imagined that they could have. And I suppose, are you also helping them to make sense of that data? Because I think one of the challenges that we're all having at the moment is data overload. And I think for smaller brands, that data overload could be overwhelming.
Well, there's three things that you're touching on here, all of which are very interesting. First of all, the small brands, forget about data for a second, they don't even have the digital tools. So we have to equip them with the digital tools, and then we have to teach them how to use them. Secondly, small brands are not used to, partly because they don't have the data tools, they're not used to analyzing data. So data analytics is something that we need to help them with, which we can, obviously, with our cloud capabilities. The third is that most small brands are not used to being on a marketplace platform. They're used to selling to wholesalers or just selling locally, in which case they have an intuitive sense of what's going on because they see who their buyers are physically. But once they enter the digital world, they're not used to engaging with the consumer digitally. So we need to teach them how to do that as well. So this is the education process that most of the big brands don't do because they either have their own .coms or they're on a platform somewhere else, and they have a sense of what digitalization means and what a digital strategy and engagement might actually be.
Now, 1111, when you look at it from a sort of a holistic perspective, and always, when you look backwards at 1111 in a sense, is always the area where you think, well, something that happened in 1111 has now become common in the retail world right across the world. When you look at this year's 1111, what do you think will be the elements of it that we'll look back and think, actually, that was the seed that changed a lot of retail globally?
It's an interesting question, David, because there are so many things, so many developments and innovations that come out of 1111. But if you look just for a moment historically, I would say live streaming, which really started 5, 6 years ago in China, has been exported everywhere. And it is the most important and popular form of consumer engagement for all e-commerce companies and for most retailers now and brands. So I think that's a big one. But I think the thing that's really interesting and is going to be the legacy of this 1111 and future 1111s is that if you have a business that doesn't have a strong ESG commitment and strategy, and if you have a business that doesn't have an inclusive component to it in terms of the way that you are not trying to help people, it's not about charity, it's about including people because it's so important for this economy and for the global economy, then you're going to be more challenged. And the way that you do that is not standing there giving out free vouchers, but it's thinking about ways to address challenges. So I give you an example of this. This is one of the coolest things that we're doing in 1111 this year, and it's going to take off. We call it the One Shoe Program. And so what we've done is we said, we want to help disabled people who only use one shoe. Now, the traditional view globally, because they're disabled people everywhere, is that they can buy 2 shoes and throw one away. And our view is that's crazy. Let's get together. And so we're working with Skechers and Reebok and Echo, and we've developed a one shoe concept. This is not as easy as it sounds because it's not about putting 1 shoe in the box instead of 2. You have to change your manufacturing and your production and your supply chain. But in doing that, we've created an ability to provide 1 shoe at half the cost. And so there are a lot of disabled people all over the world who say, wow, that's really cool. Is it a charity event? No, it's not. It's a commercial business opportunity. But innovations like this that think about everybody as opposed to just the wealthiest or just the people that want to buy a certain category, those are innovations that are going to live on as a legacy of this 1111, and they'll be employed everywhere in the world. And people will claim credit for it, and good for them. We want them to do that.
Well, Mike, when we look at and talk about Alibaba, many people know Alibaba well, but don't know Lazada. Perhaps you could just help explain a little bit about what Lazada is and actually how Lazada can help in lots of brands' global and international strategies.
Yeah, thank you, David. The Lazada is our local e-commerce marketplace business in Southeast Asia. So it has platforms in all 6 countries, 6 largest countries in Southeast Asia. And it's part of our core globalization strategy. They have more than 100 million local customers, so it's a very big business. But it's not the only business in our globalization strategy. So we have businesses in Russia and in Turkey and in Europe and all over the world, including cross-border businesses like AliExpress and B2B. So those activities define our globalization strategy. Now, the interesting thing about Lazada is that we are equipping all of our local businesses with the digital tools and capabilities that we have in China. And so if a brand thinks that China is an interesting opportunity, but also thinks that there might be interesting opportunities in South Asia or Southeast Asia or Europe or other parts of the world, then they can explore the possibility of taking advantage of that through the Alibaba ecosystem and our globalization program. So much of the learning that we have developed in China is being exported directly to these countries and being used for brands, for small businesses, and of course for the consumers.
Now, as part of that internationalization strategy of yours, Mike, do you see that there is a sort of an equalization happening now in the extent to which consumers have got fast mobile internet connectivity to be able to use the platforms, and also the platforms being able to contain new technologies, I suppose, especially in this new sort of immersive sort of metaverse, for want of another expression?
Look, I think the ecosystem that has to exist to serve merchants and consumers is very hard to create. I think many companies, many technology companies, either favor a merchant or they favor a consumer. The nature of our platforms as a marketplace allows us to cater to all consumers, large and small, and to all consumers and merchants, no matter what they want. And so the technology needs to be strong enough and have the capabilities and to have the digital tools to serve both, but serve them in balance so that they can continue to both benefit. And we are the agent responsible for creating that ecosystem to allow both to coexist and grow at the same time.
Now, looking to the future, Mike, do you think that the lessons that we've all learned in our various different businesses around the world and the changes that we've seen, are you sort of optimistic or pessimistic about what that says about both business growth and retail across the world in the future?
Well, I'm optimistic, but I'm optimistic with a reason, as opposed to just being an optimist. I think that the COVID was just a remarkably challenging event for everyone, every country, everywhere in the world, and for people, very, very hard. But the resilience of the human species is really truly remarkable. And I'm not talking about the medical resilience. I'm talking about the ability to persevere through a period of time that didn't last 1 or 2 months, but it's lasted almost 2 years. And despite all the setbacks and despite all the problems, people figured out how to adapt. And this adaptability is so core, both to our culture, but it came intuitively to people that they had to change. They had to adapt and they had to figure out how will we live in this world and whatever else is going to follow it. So I'm invigorated and inspired by the adaptability of the world. I see there are many challenges that still exist because we're not really in the post-pandemic environment yet. And I'm sure that after this challenge, there'll be other challenges. But if we keep adapting and we keep handling challenges the way we handled the pandemic, notwithstanding all of the tragedy, we're in a very good place. Not Alibaba, but we, the collective we, are in a very good place. And if we're in a good place, retail will be in a good place. And these businesses will do well.
Mike, what again, looking sort of back at that period, you're back in the campus again now. What would you say was your enduring sort of lesson that you learned over the pandemic period that is going to be applied to the business going forward?
Well, there are many lessons, but the things that stick with me are, and that's why I'm back on campus. So we're getting to the end of where we started, which is I come back here after 21 months because one of the most important lessons is even though we are one of the largest and most important technology companies in the world, we still haven't found a way to do all of this without human interaction. And as I sit with my business leaders and talk about their challenges in their business, both here in China and cross-border as we build our globalization, the travel restrictions in China make it difficult for them and for our teams to come to foreign markets. So we're having to figure out face-to-face, what will we do and how will we change the way we work? It's different doing it over Zoom. And by the way, David, I would much prefer to be with you
well,
and talking about this live than doing this on Zoom. But this is unfortunately how we have to do it. So there is no replacement for the face-to-face interaction, the relationships, the development of trust, and the ability to feel like you understand what people want, particularly when you're working across languages and cultures. And well, that is a big lesson.
Maybe that's a good thing about humanity, because at the end of the day, humanity is about being human, and being human is about having social interaction as opposed to just digital interaction.
Right.
Mike, many people have been watching our broadcasts around the world. Many of them may not have experienced China personally. They're considering their brands going into China. What advice would you give to those companies and those brands, maybe looking to 11/11/2022?
First bit of advice would be steer away from the generalization that China is an enormous market and everyone will be successful here. Second piece of advice is talk to us, or we'll come and talk to you to understand the specifics of your brand and your product, and try and help you make an assessment about whether both of those are going to work in China. And if we get beyond that point, then work with you and teach you how to get onto these platforms successfully, how to navigate all the digital tools, and how to develop the patience to allow your business to grow at an appropriate rate, as opposed to just impatiently assuming that everything's going to be great in 12 months. And I think that I've learned this from experience in talking to thousands of brands over the last 7 years. And I think most of them understand and get it. The message is slightly different for the smaller brands because we have to provide more help, as I've discussed before. But if brands are prepared to engage and get into the dialogue, this can be a fantastic opportunity, quite apart from everything else that they might be able to take advantage of in our ecosystem outside of China. So please come and talk to us. Call me, call our teams. We'll come see you. Let's get in a dialogue.
Great, Mark. Well, one of the things that I think has hit everybody during the pandemic period, as things start to get back to a new normality, is things that we missed. I recently went to an event, must have been about 600 people or so. I couldn't get over the noise in the room. You know, everybody was sort of drinking, and I hadn't heard that noise for so long. You've been out of China for, what, 20 months plus. When you first went back to China, what sort of sensory experience did you hit? And you thought, actually, yeah, I've really missed that.
My first sensory experience was staying in a government quarantine hotel, which is not a sensory experience that anyone who's listening to this really wants to undertake. It's tough. It's very isolating. Can't leave your room. Not a lot of fun. But it's the investment that you need to make to get back into China, to look and to feel everything else. I would tell you my second experience, just thinking about this, was, wow, where are all the foreigners? There's nobody here. I get on a plane, China Eastern, I'm the only non-Chinese person. In the hotel, I'm the only non-Chinese person. When I'm walking on the streets to go to meetings or to meet other people, it's all Chinese people, which of course I would expect, but where are the foreigners? And that is a big difference. Very similar to David, to just what you said, which is all of a sudden you're in a room with 600 people, you're not used to the noise. I'm not used to seeing China just with Chinese people. And that's a real surprise. One other observation is that COVID has been so well managed here. And part of it is just the very rigorous testing and retesting and quarantining and checking. So things look very normal in China. Now, COVID has had an impact on GDP, has had an impact on businesses. So there's an aspect of it which has impacted the economy and impacted businesses. But you don't see the manifestation of it in terms of closed offices, people still working from home, everybody wearing a mask. It's very, very different. So it feels very normal here. And of course, having experienced 2 years of the pandemic, I'm not used to the normal yet. That's a new experience. I have to tell you, for those of you that haven't experienced the new normal, it's great.
Good. Well, actually, on that thought, that it is great, Michael Evans, the president of Alibaba Group, it's been always a privilege and delight to talk to you. I hope next time we meet, it won't be via Zoom, but it will be in person. Mike, thanks very much indeed for speaking with us and being with us today.
Thanks, David. Great to be with you.